The automatic doors hissed open at 0700, and Ashley Cooper stepped into Mercy General's fluorescent corridor like a woman walking into a place she'd already agreed to disappear from. 3 years of practicing invisibility had given her a specific physics: shoulders slightly forward, eyes angled down, movements precise enough to seem invisible. Not weak. Invisible. Different thing entirely. The hospital smelled like it always did. Antiseptic and floor wax and something underneath, something like copper and fear that most people learned not to notice. Ashley noticed everything. Old habit. The kind of habit the Pentagon had tried to erase along with her records, her commendations, her name from every official database after Kandahar. She clocked the morning routine with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to move through hostile spaces undetected. First floor, supply inventory. Second pass, vital signs on the cardiac ward. Third rotation, crash cart restock on trauma. The movements were muscle memory wrapped in a white coat, a stethoscope, a name badge that read A. Cooper, RN, with no other details. That was the idea. The scar bisecting her left eyebrow was always covered by her bangs. She kept them longer than most nurses because long hair was one way to disappear into a crowd of other women. In the ER break room at 0645, she opened her locker. Inside, a photo of herself in desert fatigues, face unrecognizable beneath dust and exhaustion, and 8 years of ops that no longer officially existed. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, 7th Special Forces Group, Team Callsign Viper. The woman in that photograph had carried 214-pound casualties across 3 miles of open ground while rounds snapped overhead like angry hornets. The woman in this hospital was just a nurse. She closed the locker quickly. Morning rounds happened at 0700 sharp. Dr. Sterling led them through the ICU with the specific confidence of someone whose family had donated $2 million to the hospital's renovation wing and whose brother-in-law sat on the board. He was 6'5", broad-shouldered in a way that seemed designed to make doorways feel smaller, and he moved through Mercy General as though he'd already calculated which attending physicians would laugh at his jokes and which nurses would scramble to fulfill his requests before he finished making them. Ashley stood at the medication cart, checking labels with her hand steady as a surgical laser. She didn't look up when Dr. Sterling's group rotated past. That was part of the protocol. That was the way you became the kind of person doctors didn't see. Miss Cooper. His voice had the texture of someone used to being obeyed. Room for 12, vitals check, every 30 minutes. And the dressing on the post-op in 418 needs changing before drive Hoffman rounds. Don't let it slip. Yes, doctor. Her voice was softened around the edges, deferential without quite being submissive. Practiced. 3 years of practice. She didn't wait to see if he acknowledged her. That was part of it too. She simply continued what she'd been doing, moving past him toward the first patient room, and in that small absence of acknowledgement was a form of deflection so complete that by the time he finished speaking, she was already part of the fluorescent-lit background. The vitals check on 412 took 7 minutes. Blood pressure 148/92. Heart rate in the 80s. O2 sat 98% on room air. She wrote it in the chart with the neat, economical handwriting of someone who documented field triage under conditions that made hospital paperwork feel like a luxury. In room for 18, the post-operative dressing needed changing. A laparoscopic repair, something simple, something that would heal without incident if the patient didn't develop an infection and didn't smoke and didn't do any of the dozen things that regularly complicated recovery. She moved through the tasks with a precision that should have been unremarkable but somehow wasn't. The way she peeled the old dressing without dragging it across newly forming scar tissue. The way she assessed the incision, no erythema, no drainage, approximation clean, with the kind of clinical assessment that belonged to someone who'd evaluated wounds in conditions far more austere than this. The way her hands never trembled, not even slightly, not even when she was thinking about things she wasn't supposed to remember. By 09:30, she was back on the trauma floor. Room 347 was a step down from the ICU. The patient was stable enough that he didn't need ventilator support anymore, didn't need continuous cardiac monitoring, didn't need the full apparatus of crisis management that kept people alive in the first 48 hours after catastrophe. He was a Marine. She knew this because his chart said it, because he had the specific bearing of someone who'd trained his body to follow orders his mind hadn't caught up to yet. And because he had her call sign tattooed on his left forearm in Gothic lettering. Viper, with a snake wrapped around a saber beneath it. Below that, a date, the date of the extraction in Kandahar, the date when everything changed, the date when the Pentagon decided that Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper had never existed and had therefore ceased to need to exist in any official capacity. She approached his bed with the same practiced invisibility she used everywhere else in Mercy General. "How's your pain this morning, Lance Corporal?" He looked at her with polite stranger's eyes. The kind of eyes that see a nurse in blue scrubs and a name badge, nothing more. The kind of eyes that don't recognize the woman they belonged to once, the woman whose hands had pulled him 3 miles across open ground while mortars fell like weather, the woman whose voice was the last thing he heard before the evac bird landed and she was gone. "Fine," he said. "I'm doing fine." That was the confirmation she needed. That was the evidence that the erasure was complete. They'd done it perfectly. They deleted her from the Pentagon databases, scrubbed her from unit records, classified every operation she'd ever run under so many layers of black budget authority that even accessing her own file would trigger alarms that would bring people in dark suits and blank expressions. They'd done it so thoroughly that a man who'd spent 18 hours in the back of a Black Hawk with her, a man who'd watched her work on his own wounds while taking fire, didn't recognize her anymore. She checked his vitals, blood pressure 132/80, heart rate 76, O2 sat 99%, and wrote everything down in the careful script that was part of her disappearing act. She didn't mention the tattoo. She didn't mention that she knew exactly what the scar tissue on his abdomen meant, where the shrapnel had entered, how she'd packed the wound with gauze and combat tourniquet while radio static crackled overhead. "Your pain medication is available if you need it," she said. "Just use the call button." "Thanks, nurse." Just a nurse. That was the whole operation, compressed into 3 words. In the parking garage at 0700, she'd unlocked the trunk of her 2019 Honda Accord and looked at the boots. They were worn leather, military issue, broken in across 8 years and 4 continents and operations that had never officially happened. The laces were knotted in a specific pattern that signaled unit affiliation. The soles were scarred with the wear of desert terrain and concrete compounds and extraction zones that existed only in declassified files hidden inside Pentagon servers. She'd locked them back in the trunk because there were 63 RNS at Mercy General, and any one of them might see a pair of combat boots and ask questions. Questions led to conversations. Conversations led to attention. Attention was the opposite of the whole plan. By noon, she'd completed 14 patient assessments, changed for dressings, started 1-4 on a difficult stick, the kind where the vein rolled twice before she found the right angle, and restocked the crash cart without breaking her careful rhythm of invisibility. She moved like someone operating a body remotely, like the essential functions of nursing had been automated and she was simply the vessel that held them. The only moment that broke the pattern came when she was pulling supplies from the supply closet on the trauma floor, when a nurse named Rachel, 2 years at Mercy General, married with a kid in preschool, the kind of person who asked questions but forgot to follow up, stopped her in the hallway. "How do you do that?" Rachel said. Ashley paused. "Do what?" "Just stay so calm. All the time. Everything's chaos and you're just like..." Rachel made a gesture that was supposed to convey steadiness but came out looking like a question. "Aren't you ever tired?" For a moment, the question hung in the fluorescent-lit space between them like something physical. "You learn," Ashley said finally. "You learn to do the job. That's all it is." It wasn't an answer, but Rachel seemed satisfied with it. She didn't see anything else. Nobody ever did. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that it was working. The worst part was that Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper, decorated operator, woman who'd spent 8 years moving through the worst versions of human geography with nothing but skill and muscle memory and the kind of calm that came from having already survived the worst, had successfully become invisible enough that nobody asked questions anymore. Nobody looked twice. Nobody wondered why a nurse with hands steady as surgical steel and eyes that had seen things moved through their trauma bay with the specific efficiency of someone operating on a different plane of existence. She'd made herself into a ghost. And ghosts don't attract attention. Ghosts don't get discovered. Ghosts don't get called back to account for the things they did when they were still real. That was the idea. That was exactly the idea. She just hadn't anticipated how completely it would work. Dr. Sterling leaned against the nurse's station during the 3 p.m. shift change, his 6'5" frame commanding the space like a general surveying conquered territory. His voice carried across the gathered staff with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never experienced consequences. "I'll bet anyone here $50 the mouse doesn't last the week," he said, not bothering to lower his volume. "Look at her, probably cries in the supply closet between rounds." Laughter rippled through the group like dominoes falling. Ashley continued charting at her station, pen steady, eyes never leaving the page. She could feel the weight of their collective gaze, the moment of collective cruelty that bonded them together at her expense. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. The pen kept moving, steady as a pulse monitor showing normal sinus rhythm. Sterling's power was institutional and complete. He had 3 board members on speed dial, his family name on the hospital's East Wing endowment, and a surgical record that made administrators nervous about questioning him. He was the kind of untouchable that only old money and family connections could manufacture. The bet itself was meaningless, the real message was embedded in the phrasing. "You don't belong here. We all know it. Even you know it." The other nurses exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some simply grateful the spotlight wasn't on them. In a hospital hierarchy, the surgeon was apex predator. The attending was pack leader. The nurse was labor. And Ashley Cooper had made herself the smallest, quietest labor possible. That afternoon, Ashley carried her lunch tray through the cafeteria, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as a ghost. The soup steamed on the ceramic bowl, minestrone from the kitchen, bread roll on the side. She moved past Sterling's table near the windows. He didn't even look up from his phone. His leg extended into her path like a drawbridge lowering, casual and deliberate. The tray crashed to the floor. Soup exploded across the tile in a spreading stain, bread roll spinning, crackers cascading like shrapnel. The sound echoed through the cafeteria, a sharp, unmissable crack of ceramic shattering. Everyone turned. The room went dead silent. Sterling didn't move. His eye stayed fixed on his phone, the picture of indifference. "Careful there, clumsy," he said without looking up. The words dripped condescension like blood from a fresh wound. Several doctors nearby forced small laughs, the nervous laugh of people who recognized a predator establishing dominance and wanted no part of being the next target. Ashley knelt without hesitation, began collecting scattered food with napkins from the dispenser. Her hands moved with automatic precision, muscle memory from 8 years of moving with purpose through chaos. Soup-soaked bread. Scattered vegetables. Crumbs gathering. Sterling dropped a patient chart at her feet. Paper spilled across the mess, mixing with minestrone and tile dust. He leaned down, his presence suddenly looming, his voice dropping to that particular register he used on nurses and residents, the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Pick that up, sweetheart. Since you're already down there." It wasn't a request. It was a command. The subtext was unmissable: "You are beneath me. Below floor level. Below what matters. Below dignity." Ashley took one measured breath. The fluorescent lights above buzzed in that electrical way that made the moment feel suspended in amber. She wiped her hands on a napkin. A single tear escaped her left eye, just one, crystalline and perfect, like a precision instrument malfunction. She wiped it with the back of her hand, never breaking eye contact with Sterling. Her voice emerged steady as a flat line, each word precise and level. "I've picked up heavier things than your ego, doctor." The sentence landed like a surgical strike, targeted, devastating, impossible to recover from in public. The cafeteria froze. Someone's coffee cup stopped halfway to their mouth. A residence chart dropped onto his lap. Sterling's face flushed crimson, that particular shade of rage that comes from public humiliation by someone he'd categorized as powerless. His jaw worked silently for a moment, the calculation happening behind his eyes as he recalibrated. He forced a laugh, sharp and brittle as breaking glass. "Ooh, the mouse has teeth." He stood, smoothed his white coat, walked away with his shoulders set hard and high. But his pace was slightly too fast. His hands were clenched slightly too tight. The set of his shoulders promised retaliation. Everyone watched him go. Nobody looked at Ashley. The attention was worse than the insult, the uncomfortable awareness that she'd just crossed a line that changed the entire geometry of power in that room. She returned to work, finishing her shift without incident, moving through the remainder of afternoon rounds with the same invisible precision that had carried her through 3 years at Mercy General. That evening, Ashley updated charts in room 347, caring for a new admission, Marcus Webb, Marine Corporal, motorcycle accident, fractured ribs and concussion. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm as she checked his vitals, glancing at the chart, 24 years old, stationed at Fort Carson, admitted 18 hours ago. As she reached to adjust his full line, her eyes caught the tattoo on his left forearm. Black ink. Precise. 2 crossed rifles underneath. Angel 6. Her hand stopped moving for exactly 1 second, just long enough to register the permanence of what she was seeing. Her old call sign. Permanently embedded in his skin like a prayer. Marcus looked at her with polite stranger's eyes, the kind of recognition you give to someone doing their job well but whom you've never met before. "First time working with Marines?" he asked, his voice easy and casual. She forced her voice level, pulling back from the moment like breaking the surface of water. "No. Not the first time." He smiled, friendly but distant, the smile of a man who didn't understand that the woman across from him was the only reason he'd survived a compound in Kandahar where 214 Marines had gone in and only 203 came out alive. "Well, you're doing great," he said. She nodded, checked his pressure, noted the readings. Blood pressure elevated, stress response, normal post-trauma. Respiratory rate steady. She finished the vitals check and didn't trust herself to stay in the room longer. Ashley walked calmly to the supply closet on the 3rd floor, closed the door behind her, and slid down the wall until she was sitting on the concrete floor beside boxes of gauze and sterilized instruments. The darkness was almost total, just the thin line of light under the door. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. But the equation that had been her entire existence for 3 years had just become untenable. In Kandahar, she'd been immortal, not because she couldn't be killed, but because she'd lived for something larger than survival. She'd been necessary. She'd been Angel 6, a call sign earned through 73 combat casualty saves under sustained fire, through medical decisions made at the edges of shock and blood loss. But that woman didn't exist anymore. That record was classified. That name was erased. Now she existed as Ashley Cooper, quiet nurse, pushover, someone a 6'5" surgeon could humiliate at lunch and expect her to finish her shift without incident. Except something had shifted in the cafeteria. Something had cracked in the facade of meekness she'd spent 1,095 days constructing. She'd felt it the moment those words left her mouth. The room had gone silent because everyone had heard something they shouldn't have, a glimpse of someone entirely different operating underneath the surface. And that was the most dangerous thing she could have done. At 2,300 hours, night shift. Ashley restocked crash carts on the 3rd floor, her routine interrupted by sirens, that sound that made every medical professional's nervous system recognize the approach of crisis. The ER doors burst open with paramedics wheeling in a motorcycle accident victim, mid-20s male, asphalt and chrome meeting biological fragility at 47 miles per hour. Steering wheel impact to the chest. The charge nurse shouted, "Trauma 1." Ashley moved downstairs in controlled sequence with everyone else, her presence settling into the background rhythm of organized chaos. The patient's vitals dropped rapidly in real time. Heart rate climbing, 148, 156, 162. Blood pressure falling 95/60ths, 88/55ths, stabilizing dangerously low. His breath came shallow, muffled heart sounds audible even without the stethoscope. Ashley heard it immediately in the pattern, the sound of fluid accumulation, of pressure building where it shouldn't exist. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardial sac, the heart's outer membrane, compressing the chambers until they couldn't pump effectively. The patient had maybe 20 minutes before cardiac arrest became inevitable. The ER attending paged the on-call surgeon. The response came back, traffic on IA-25, ETA 20 minutes minimum. The attending's face went pale. "He's not going to make it," he said quietly. Ashley said 5 words, "Neither will we," waiting. She was already gloved, ultrasound probe in hand, moving toward the patient with the confidence of someone who'd made this decision at a forward operating base in Helmand Province with nothing but field equipment and the weight of command. The attending looked at her, processing some calculation that lasted 2 seconds. "Do it." It wasn't permission. It was acknowledgement that Ashley was the only one in the room with the expertise to save this man's life. Her hands moved with the precision of muscle memory. Supine position, chest prepped with betadine, antiseptic, smell sharp and chemical. She positioned the ultrasound probe between the 4th and 5th ribs on the left side, angle toward the left shoulder, the transducer showing her the internal landscape in grayscale, the bright echo of the heart, the dark fluid surrounding it like an infection. The needle went in. 14-gauge angiocath, inserted at a shallow angle, advancement measured in millimeters. She felt the resistance change as the needle pierced the pericardial membrane. The hiss of air escaping as she withdrew the needle, leaving only the catheter. Syringe connection. The pull back on the plunger, 35 milliliters of blood, dark and heavy, draining into the syringe. The monitor showed it immediately, pressure climbing from 70/40ths to 95/60ths. Heart rate dropping from 162 to 128. The muffled heart sounds cleared, the rhythm returning to normal sinus, the sound of a heart suddenly able to pump again. The patient's oxygen saturation climbed, 84, 88, 92, finally stabilizing at 95%. Breathing deeper. Color returning to gray skin. The attending exhaled slowly, realization crossing his face, the awareness that he'd just witnessed the difference between a patient who died and a patient who lived, and the difference was the quiet nurse who'd never introduced herself. Where did you learn that?" he asked. Ashley stripped off her gloves, voice flat and even, "Nursing school." She turned away, moved back to the supply station. But from across the ER, through the observation window, Dr. Sterling watched every second of the procedure. She saw his expression shift from casual contempt to something different. Calculation. Reassessment. The security camera in the corner blinked red, its eye recording everything. And Dr. Sterling was already reaching for his phone before the patient was fully stabilized, his fingers moving with the practiced speed of someone about to weaponize what he'd just witnessed. The sirens cut through the ER at 2,347 hours like something alive, wailing through the automatic doors before the paramedics even touched ground. Ashley was restocking the crash cart in Bay 4 when she heard it, that particular siren pitch that meant not a routine MVA, but something that had already gone wrong en route. The radio crackled first. Then dispatch, incoming. Male, 28. Head-on collision at I-25 and Colorado Boulevard. Patient unresponsive. Paradoxical breathing. ETA 3 minutes. She didn't pause. Didn't look up from the medication tray. Just closed the drawer with one hand and moved toward the ambulance bay where the team was already assembling, 2 trauma nurses, the ER resident, the charge physician. The night shift at Mercy General had that particular rhythm Ashley understood better than her own heartbeat. Everything else was noise. This was signal. The ambulance doors burst open at 23:51. What rolled out was structured chaos, a body wrapped in a cervical collar, skin the color of old concrete, chest moving in that wrong way that meant air was going everywhere except into his lungs. The paramedic ride-along was already calling vitals like a priest reciting scripture, severe tachycardia at 156, blood pressure 78/52 and dropping, respirations 34, SpO2 81% on high flow O2, GCS of 8. Not a patient. A crisis in human shape. What are we looking at? Dr. Chen, the ER resident, was already moving beside the stretcher, hands checking the cervical collar, scanning for external bleeding. T-bone hit the driver's side door, the paramedic said, muscles tight in his jaw. Massive chest trauma. We've got what looks like a tension pneumothorax, but something else is going on. Breath sounds are muffled on the left, he's hypotensive despite 2 large bore 4s, and his JVD is distended like a balloon. Ashley's hands were already moving. Gloves. Then the monitor leads. Sticky pads on pale skin. The heart rhythm scrolled across the screen like a confession, sinus tachycardia pushing toward the red end of every scale, the QRS complexes beginning to collapse, the kind of electrical chaos that meant the pump itself was starting to fail. She'd seen this pattern before. Not in Denver. In a field hospital outside Kandahar where a 17-year-old kid with a roadside bomb fragment in his chest had coded for exactly 6 minutes before his heart simply stopped. We're going to Trauma 1. Dr. Chen said, already moving. Get 2 units of O negative on standby, set up for emergency intubation, and he paused, listening to the chest through his stethoscope. His face went tight. No breath sounds on the left. Breath sounds muffled on the right. Someone get me the ultrasound. Now. The hospital's night shift doctor was 20 minutes out from the city. 20 minutes to get from home to parking lot to door. 20 minutes while this man's blood pressure continued its slow descent toward the inevitable flat line, while his lungs filled with something that wasn't air, while the pressure inside his chest built like a bomb counting down. The on-call surgeon from St. Luke's had been called. Trauma surgeries didn't happen at Mercy General, but even with lights and sirens, even with a helicopter if they got lucky, there was the small matter of time, and time was something this patient was losing in measured heartbeats. Dr. Chen swept the ultrasound probe across the left chest wall. The image resolved on screen. Ashley saw it immediately. No air echoes in the pleural space, that wasn't it. What she saw was worse. Fluid. Dark fluid filling the pericardium around the heart itself like a fist closing around a beating muscle, the cardiac silhouette compressed, the chambers struggling to fill, the whole system suffocating from the inside. Cardiac tamponade, Ashley said. Not a question. Dr. Chen looked at her for exactly 1 second. We need the surgeon. Call and push ETA. 20 minutes minimum, the charge nurse said, phone already in hand. Traffic is clear but... The monitor beeped once. Then flatlined. Not a slow descent. Not a warning. A sudden vertical line, the kind that meant the pressure around the heart had finally crossed the threshold where the organ could no longer squeeze, could no longer push blood through the system, could no longer sustain the fiction of life. Ashley had exactly 4 minutes before irreversible brain damage. Exactly 4 minutes to do something that shouldn't be done by a nurse with a stethoscope, but by a surgeon with a consent form and a OR waiting. Start compressions, Dr. Chen said, but his voice already had the sound of going through motions, the tone of someone who knew the math didn't work. CPR on a tamponade patient was pushing fluid around a heart that couldn't expand. It was sand through a clogged pipe. Ashley moved to the supply cart. 18-gauge needle. Syringe. The pressure coursing through her body felt like the kind of calm that comes after you've already died once and walked back out, the kind of composure that didn't belong in a Denver hospital and definitely didn't belong to a trauma nurse named Ashley Cooper. Muscle memory took over. Her hands moved on their own. This was a procedure she'd performed exactly 7 times, twice on live patients in firefights outside the wire, twice on training mannequins during field medical training course at Camp Mackle, 3 times on the range during tactical movement drills where the stakes were theoretical and the outcomes were measured by instructors checking clipboards. What are you doing? Dr. Chen's voice cut across the bay, but his hands didn't stop compressions. Buying time, Ashley said. She'd already palpated the landmarks, the fifth intercostal space, the mid-axillary line, the precise angle that would slide a needle through ribs and muscle and visceral pericardium into the space that was now a prison for a beating heart. She positioned the syringe. Her hands were steady as a surgical laser. They had to be. The margin for error was the thickness of a chamber wall. The needle slid between ribs. She felt the give, the tissue resistance, then the sudden loss of pressure as she breached into the pericardial space. Blood came back into the syringe immediately, dark and thick and pulsing with the urgency of trapped pressure. "We've got return," she said. The words felt like they were coming from someone else's mouth. Someone who'd been trained for this. Someone who'd done it when the fire was actual and the stakes were measured in body bags. She pulled back on the plunger. 20 milliliters of blood. The monitor traced a spike. The patient's heart suddenly had room to beat. 30 milliliters. Another complex. The rhythm smoothed out like someone turning down the volume on a scream. 40 milliliters. A pulse reappeared on the monitor. Sinus rhythm. Not pretty. Not stable. But alive. "Get him upstairs," Dr. Chen said. His eyes found Ashley for a fraction of a second. Long enough to see the recognition. Long enough to see he understood exactly what he'd just witnessed and that it shouldn't have been possible. "Now. Tell OR he's coming hot with a pericardial bleed. I don't care if the surgeon was asleep, they have 3 minutes." The patient moved. Stretcher wheels squeaked against tile. The night shift swallowed him up, voices calling across each other, the choreography of a hospital that suddenly knew what it was doing. Ashley stood at the crash cart with blood on her glove and a syringe in her hand and the particular silence that comes after a code breaks and someone lives instead of dies. The ER resident was already calling the OR. The charge nurse was already documenting. The paramedic who'd brought the patient in was already moving toward the ambulance bay. Nobody thanked her. Nobody made eye contact. But across the bay, leaning against the wall of the medication room, Dr. Sterling stood with his phone already in hand and his eyes tracking hers with the intensity of someone watching a predator emerge from tall grass. He'd seen everything. The technique. The precision. The way her hands had known exactly where to go and how to angle the needle without hesitation, without checking a reference, without the kind of uncertainty that defined every first-time intervention she'd ever witnessed on a trauma rotation. He was already dialing before the patient cleared the ER. The first call went to his contact in the hospital administration. The second went to the State Board of Nursing. The third went to someone at the Pentagon, though she didn't know that yet and wouldn't know it until the morning came and the doors to her ordinary life locked shut behind her forever. Dr. Sterling smiled at his phone, and somewhere in that smile was the understanding that he'd just watched a woman perform a procedure that was only in the competency scope of trauma surgeons, and he had all the proof he needed to destroy her. The morning came grey and hostile, the kind of Denver dawn that threatened rain without committing to it. Ashley had clocked out at 0600, pulled on her jacket over scrub still damp with other people's blood, and made it exactly as far as the employee parking lot before the hospital's main-line security car intercepted her at Bay 4. Not a request. A command. The guard's radio crackled something she couldn't hear, but his posture changed. "Director wants to see you. Now." In administrative. The stairs up to the second floor felt like climbing into an ambush. She'd trained for this. Not in hospitals. In compounds where the intelligence was wrong and the exits were compromised. But the principle was identical: move toward the threat with composure intact, hands visible, face neutral. Don't give them the satisfaction. Dr. Sterling was already there when she walked in. Of course he was. The hospital director, Marcus Webb, stood behind his desk with the particular look of a man who'd been handed a problem he didn't want to solve before his coffee was finished. Sterling's arms were crossed. His face wore an expression of profound disappointment, the kind a parent reserves for a child who's finally shown their true nature. "Miss Cooper," Webb began, but Sterling cut him off with a subtle gesture. "I've been reviewing the incident from last night," Sterling said. His voice had the texture of velvet over concrete. Your intervention was impressive. Medically speaking. Which is precisely the problem. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to an email. You performed a pericardiocentesis. For cardiac tamponade. Do you understand what that procedure is? Pericardial needle decompression, Ashley said. Not inflection. Not question. Statement. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her breathing was steady. Inside her chest, her heart was doing exactly what that patient's heart had been doing, trapped, pressurized, screaming against its cage. Precisely, Sterling said. A surgical procedure. Performed by surgeons. Trauma surgeons. Not by trauma nurses, no matter how talented they might be. He turned to Webb. I've already contacted the State Board of Nursing. Scope of practice violation. She's exposed us to liability, destroyed our accreditation standing, and committed what amounts to practicing medicine without a license. Webb rubbed his temples. Ashley, you saved that man's life. Everyone knows that. But Dr. Sterling has a point about protocol. I've engaged an outside investigator, Sterling continued, his voice moving over Webb's like water over stone. They'll be reviewing her complete employment file by Monday. All credentials, all certifications, all references. Full transparency. He showed Webb the email on his phone. The letterhead was from a firm called Pinnacle Credentials Verification. We need to ensure that her credentials are entirely legitimate. That every position on her resume, every reference, every clinical competency, checks out perfectly. Ashley's jaw tightened. Just barely. The kind of thing that would look like a twitch unless you knew what you were looking for. As chief of surgery, Sterling said, I've also contacted the State Board directly. They'll be sending an investigator within 48 hours to review the incident, the security footage, and Ms. Cooper's educational history. He smiled. I've also reached out to the nursing school she attended. Just to confirm her enrollment dates and academic standing. You know how important accuracy is in these matters. Webb cleared his throat. You're suspended, Ashley. Pending investigation. Full pay, but you can't step foot in the hospital until we sort this out. 2 weeks minimum. I'm sorry. He actually did look sorry, which somehow made it worse. Sterling added, as she stood to leave, we'll need your complete employment history by Monday. Every position. Every supervisor. Every reference. Every certification. Complete transparency. It's hospital policy. Ashley knew what that meant. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper had been ordered to disappear after her team extracted a CIA asset from a compound that was never supposed to exist. The Pentagon had buried every record. Every commendation. Every proof she'd been anything more than a ghost. The Navy had gone to war with the digital history of her own existence. There was no employment record to produce. No references who could verify her service. No documentation that would survive the kind of investigation that was about to come looking. She nodded once. Understood. As she walked out, Sterling made 3 more phone calls. The first to a board member whose daughter he'd once saved during an emergency C-section, creating a debt that had never been explicitly called due until now. The second to the hospital's legal team, ensuring that the investigation would be thorough and visible and absolutely impossible to survive. The third to a contact at the Pentagon, someone who'd worked with military liaison services in the past, asking if there was any reason he should know about a nurse named Ashley Cooper, and whether any records might exist that could be problematic if they surfaced. The voice on the other end of that call went very quiet. Then, I'll look into it. Which meant someone had already known. Someone had been waiting for exactly this moment. Someone in a bunker with classified clearance had just received confirmation that the ghost they'd tried to bury had finally surfaced, and the hunt was about to begin. Saturday morning broke grey and cold over Denver. Ashley had finished the overnight shift, exhausted in the way that sleep wouldn't fix, the kind of tired that lived in bones, in the parts of you that remembered things you decided to forget. She was pulling her jacket from the locker when the nurse manager appeared, moving with the specific urgency that meant bad news was traveling at speed. "Ashley, the director wants you in her office. Now." The manager wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's about last night." The walk to the third floor felt longer than it should have. She'd known this was coming the moment Dr. Sterling watched her perform the pericardiocentesis, his face going still in that particular way that meant he was calculating angles. The sterile smell of the hospital corridors mixed with something else, the sharp scent of fierce sweat on her own skin, a smell she hadn't experienced since Kandahar. She pushed it down. Compartmentalization was muscle memory. The director's office was all soft colors and worse news. Patricia Chen sat behind a desk with 2 manila folders and the expression of someone about to execute an order she didn't enjoy. Ashley had never seen her look uncomfortable before. That was the first sign everything had moved past the strategic phase into something more calculated. "Sit," Patricia said, not unkindly. Ashley Saturday. Her hand stayed flat on her thighs. The office smelled like expensive coffee and printer ink and the particular staleness of institutional air conditioning. "You performed an emergency pericardiocentesis last night," Patricia began, reading from the incident report. "On a trauma patient in cardiac tamponade. A surgical procedure that falls outside the scope of nursing practice under Colorado state regulations." The words came like a verdict. Ashley had known they would. The procedure was the marker. It was too precise, too authoritative, too much like something a person did when they'd trained in combat hospitals where you either performed the procedure or watched someone die. No middle ground. No calling for backup that wouldn't arrive. The patient would have died otherwise, Ashley said quietly. "I understand that," Patricia replied, "and she probably did. And I'm not the one making this decision." She pushed one of the folders across the desk. "Dr. Sterling filed a formal complaint with the State Board of Nursing this morning. He's also submitted a request for investigation of your credentials and employment history." The folder sat there like a thing with weight. Ashley didn't open it. She could read the substance without looking at the words. She'd seen similar documents in different languages, different countries, all carrying the same message: "You're being erased." "There's a hearing scheduled for Friday," Patricia continued. "You'll have the opportunity to present your side." She paused, and Ashley heard what she wasn't saying, "but you won't survive it. In the interim, you're suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Your nursing license is flagged. You're not to work any additional shifts." Ashley's jaw tightened. Not from emotion, from the effort of keeping emotion contained, pressing it down into the same place where she kept the memories of 73 successful saves, the weight of carrying wounded through firefights, the call sign that had meant something to people who were dead now or trying to forget she existed. "I understand," Ashley said. Patricia slid the second folder across. "This is the formal termination notice. Read it. Your union representative can help you prepare for the hearing," but she stopped. Met Ashley's eyes for the first time. "You know what he's going to argue. Advanced medical knowledge. Procedure execution at a level that suggests training beyond nursing school. He's already calling your references." By Tuesday morning, Dr. Sterling had made 3 phone calls to board members, people with institutional power and reasons to listen to him, his family's connections running through Denver's money like arterial lines. He'd contacted the nursing school Ashley had attended under her new identity, asking detailed questions about her training, her background, her employment history before Mercy General. The investigator he'd hired had already begun the process of pulling records that didn't exist, asking questions about certifications that had been filed under a name that wasn't her real name. The formal termination notice arrived Tuesday afternoon. No nursing license. Credential fraud. Scope violation. Hearing scheduled for Friday 1,400 hours. Expected outcome, revocation. She sat in her apartment that evening, the notice on her kitchen table, and didn't eat. Wednesday morning came grey and she still didn't eat. The VA hospital sent an appointment reminder, mandatory psych evaluation required for continued outpatient care. Thursday 0900, the appointment she couldn't skip without triggering a system that would flag her name, draw attention, accelerate whatever was already in motion. She walked into the VA waiting room and sat between a Marine with a prosthetic arm and an Army sergeant who rocked slightly, eyes closed. The smell of the place was antiseptic and something else, the particular odor of people who'd survived things that left marks. She recognized two faces from field hospitals in Kandahar. One of them, a younger Marine with burn scars mapping his left side, glanced at her briefly. His eyes passed through her without catching. No recognition. Just two damaged civilians sharing space in a room where damage was the common language. Her phone buzzed. A message from the Mercy General Discharge System, Marcus Webb, patient from room 347, had been discharged. His final notation to the charge nurse read, *, that quiet one reminded me of someone I knew overseas. Couldn't place it. *. The PA system called names. Cooper, Ashley, room 7. She stood. Moved toward the door. Her hands, the same hands that had held intestines in place while waiting for evacuation helicopters, that had applied tourniquets in sandstorms, that had performed 73 successful combat casualty saves under fire, were shaking now. Not from fear. From the effort of restraint. From being nobody. Not Senior Chief. Not Angel 6. Not the person she'd been before she was ordered to disappear. Just another broken thing waiting for someone to tell her how broken she was. The PA sat across from her in a windowless room. Asked questions about sleep. About flashbacks. About intrusive thoughts. Ashley answered in the required minimal words. 2 hours she didn't have. 2 hours of her life in a fluorescent box before she could leave and return to her apartment and wait for Friday to arrive. That was Wednesday. Thursday night she didn't sleep. She sat on her apartment floor and stared at the combat boots in the box under her bed, the only physical evidence that Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper had ever existed. In 12 hours, she would walk into a hearing room where Dr. Sterling would present evidence of her qualifications, her training, her impossible knowledge of trauma medicine. She couldn't defend herself. Every explanation required her to admit to classified service. Every word she spoke about her background would be a violation of the orders that had buried her. The silence of her apartment pressed down like weight. Friday morning came dark and early. 5:30. She was in the parking lot at Mercy General at 0555, preparing to walk into the hearing room, when she heard them, the sound that cut through everything else, the sound that meant the rules had changed. Rotor wash. Heavy and rhythmic. Two Black Hawk helicopters settling on the rooftop helipad with the violence of displaced air that shook the windows on the east side of the building. Ashley froze. She knew that sound. She'd flown in those machines. She'd jumped from them. She'd watched people die under them. Two figures emerged from the stairwell on the ground floor, Navy SEALs in dress uniforms, boots echoing on tile with military precision. They walked directly to the nurse's station where a charge nurse was opening the electronic logs. "We're looking for Angel 6, the taller SEAL said. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper. Where is she? The charge nurse looked confused. Started to shake her head. But a resident who'd been working the night shift pointed toward the parking lot. That's her, walking up now. 3 floors above, in the conference room where her termination hearing was assembling, Dr. Sterling sat at the head of a table with legal counsel beside him. His face held the confidence of a man who understood institutional power, whose family had taught him that connections ran deeper than competence, that money and reputation were armor against consequence. He was reviewing his notes when the door opened and Ashley walked in, flanked by 2 Navy SEALs in dress uniforms. Behind them came a Navy commander. Dr. Sterling's face went white in increments, like someone draining blood from a stone. The commander's hands trembled as he opened a declassified folder. His voice came out careful and formal, the voice of someone reading something that had been locked in Pentagon files for 8 years. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Marie Cooper, United States Navy Special Warfare Combat Medic. A female SEAL stepped forward. 2 Navy crosses for extraordinary heroism in combat. Silence. Complete. The board members sat frozen like people who'd forgotten how to breathe. Silver Star for gallantry in action against enemy forces in Kandahar province, another SEAL said quietly. Dr. Sterling's mouth moved but produced nothing. His hands went flat on the table. The legal counsel looked between the file and Ashley, as if Ashley had transformed into something that couldn't be explained using the vocabulary of administrative suspension. For Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat operations, the third SEAL continued. A board member whispered something, words too small to carry weight. The commander nodded to a master chief with grey at his temples, a man whose face held the particular gravity that came from seeing things that couldn't be unseen. 73 successful combat casualty saves under fire, the master chief said. Call sign Angel 6. Classified operations extraction record. Emergency field hospital deployments under active mortar fire. Each SEAL added detail between medals like spaces between heartbeats. By the time they reached the classified operations list, Dr. Sterling's color had drained completely, his face the shade of old paper. The hospital director stared. The legal counsel had stopped taking notes. The rotor wash hit the windows like artillery fire. 2 UH-60M Blackhawks descended toward Mercy General's rooftop helipad at 0600 Friday morning, their rotors shaking the entire building as if the hospital itself might lift into the Denver sky. The noise penetrated every floor, every room, every corner where people were trying to save lives or pretend to sleep. Nobody ignored that sound. The sound of government arrival. The sound of authority that transcended hospital hierarchy, state law, and the fragile protection that men like Sterling believed they possessed. In the 5th floor conference room, the hospital director was already standing when 2 Navy SEALs in dress uniforms, blues so sharp they looked like they could cut, walked directly to the nurse's station and asked for Senior Chief Cooper by her old call sign. Not her name. Not her civilian identity. Her call sign. The moment that word entered the hospital, every assumption Sterling had constructed over 6 months began to collapse like a building in controlled demolition. Ashley was in the break room when the intercom crackled. She was refilling her coffee, black, no sugar, the same way she'd drunk it in the field, when the overhead system announced a mandatory meeting in the conference room. The way it was announced suggested this wasn't optional. The way everyone moved suggested they already knew something catastrophic had happened. She set her mug down with the kind of deliberate care she used during surgery, the kind that meant nothing had rattled her, not yet. Not yet. The conference room was packed. Hospital director. Legal counsel. 3 board members. Sterling stood near the window, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap, his posture already defensive. And standing in the center of the room, in dress blue uniforms with medals arranged like a field of honor, was a Navy commander with silver eagles on his shoulders and eyes that had seen things that made the ER look like a playground. Commander James Mitchell. She'd served under him in Kandahar. 8 years ago. Before the Pentagon decided she'd never existed. The commander didn't ask for permission to speak. He opened a manila folder, genuinely physical, not digital, which meant this had been classified until moments ago, and began reading in a voice steady as a surgical heartbeat. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Marie Cooper. Service record commencing August 2013. 2 Navy crosses. He paused between each medal like a priest administering sacrament. Silver Star. Another pause. The room was breathing in unison now. For Purple Hearts. Sterling's face had gone the color of old bone. Combat record includes 73 documented successful casualty saves under active fire. Kandahar Province, Helmand Valley, Anbar Province. Designated Angel 6. Call sign recognition across 3rd Battalion, SEAL Team 3, and 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Service record declassified this morning pending reinstatement proceedings. The hospital director's pen had stopped moving. The legal counsel had one hand on her chest as if checking her own heartbeat. Sterling said nothing. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again like a fish stranded on dry land. Then the doors opened again and James Chen walked in carrying a laptop like a bomb technician carrying a warhead. Chen was 34, former Army, 2 tours in Iraq as a signals officer. He'd transferred to Mercy General's IT department 3 years ago and said almost nothing to anyone. He was the type of man Sterling never noticed, which was why Sterling had been careless in front of him. The type of man who existed in the infrastructure, unseen, recording everything. Chen connected the laptop to the projector without asking permission. The footage began playing on the screen behind the commander. Every humiliation. The bet in the nurse's station, Sterling's voice clear and contemptuous, she'll quit in a week. The cafeteria, the tray scattering across tile, the chart thrown at Ashley's feet. Pick that up, sweetheart. Then Ashley, on her knees, looking up at him with an expression so controlled it looked like contempt. I've picked up heavier things than your ego, Doctor. The room watched in silence. Toxic silence. Silence with weight. Then the emails appeared on screen. Sterling to board members at 0247 Thursday morning, we need to eliminate this liability before she costs us litigation. Sterling to the investigator, find something we can use. Credentials fraud. Scope creep. Anything. Her file smells wrong. Sterling's call log from Thursday afternoon, 37 minutes of conversation with a board member who'd since recused himself. The deleted files Chen had recovered through redundant server backups. The text message Sterling had sent at 0432 that morning, don't call me on anything traceable. Sterling stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward with a sound like a scream. This is out of context. I was protecting patient safety. She performed procedures outside her scope. That's documented. The commander's voice cut through him like a blade through silk. You attempted to destroy the career of a decorated combat veteran because she made you feel small. Not angry. Not loud. Just factual. Like reading a weather report. She saved a man's life using field medicine you'll never understand, and you retaliated because you needed her to be less than you. The hospital director stood. Her voice was ice. Dr. Sterling, your privileges are terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. She pressed a button on her desk phone. Bring security to the 5th floor. My family has connections. Sterling's voice was rising now, desperation cracking through the crust of arrogance. You can't do this. My grandfather served on the state medical board. My father has relationships with. The board chairman, an older man who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. His name was Richard Halloway. He'd been in medicine for 52 years. He looked at Sterling the way someone looks at a stain they're about to clean up. Your family's money bought you this position, Dr. Sterling. It will not buy you out of this. The State Medical Board will receive all evidence within the hour. Their investigation is already underway. You're terminated from this hospital, and your medical license is under formal review for gross misconduct, abuse of power, and retaliatory employment practices. He paused. Let it settle like sediment. Leave now, or leave in handcuffs. Sterling's face flashed rage, then panic, then something worse, the expression of a man who'd suddenly realized his entire network of protection was made of smoke. He stumbled from the room, past the security guards who'd just arrived, his expensive shoes clicking against the tile with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Nobody followed him. Nobody needed to. The commander turned to Ashley. For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face, not much, just the faintest acknowledgement that he was looking at a soldier he'd thought was dead. Welcome home, Angel 6. Ashley didn't move. Didn't blink. Her hands were steady on the table in front of her. When she spoke, her voice had dropped an octave, and every person in that room realized they were no longer hearing a nurse. They were hearing the rank beneath the scrubs. Thank you, sir. requesting reinstatement to active duty status pending medical clearance. The commander smiled. Already processed. You've got a new assignment. Mercy General's administration just approved funding for a combat trauma training program. Director-level position. Dodd grant, full authority. You'll be integrating field medicine protocols into civilian hospital response for mass casualty scenarios. He extended his hand. You're going to change how every hospital in this country prepares for what you've already survived. She shook his hand. Firm grip. Professional. But her eyes had suddenly remembered how to hope. 6 months later, Ashley walked through Mercy General's front entrance at 0730 on a Thursday morning, and she was walking toward something instead of away from it. Her badge now read Director of Combat Trauma Training. Her office was on the 4th floor, bright windows overlooking Denver, bookshelves filling with protocols she was writing, surgical texts she was updating, field medicine guides she was adapting for civilian use. On the wall behind her desk was a shadow box. Inside, her worn combat boots, weathered and scuffed from Kandahar dust. Beside them, a photo of her SEAL team, all of them alive in that moment, all of them carrying invisible weight. And below, her decorations. 2 Navy crosses. A silver star. For Purple Hearts arranged like medals of honor they actually were. Through the window, she could see the parking lot. At a folding table between a nail salon and a vape shop across the street, a man sat in a cheap suit selling supplemental insurance. His banner flapped in the Denver wind. His name was Sterling, though almost nobody remembered it. A woman passed his table without stopping. Then another. He checked his phone, put it down, adjusted his papers. He was making maybe $200 a week, and his medical license was under permanent review. His family had stopped taking his calls after the news broke. The hospital board had released a statement about core values of respect and accountability. The state medical board had investigated for 90 days and found pattern evidence of harassment, retaliation, and abuse of position. He was free. Free to sell insurance from a folding table. Free to understand, for the first time in his life, what powerlessness felt like. Ashley's phone buzzed that evening. Marcus Webb, room 347, the Marine with the tattoo. His text read, "Just saw the news article about your program. I finally placed where I knew you from. Angel 6. You carried me out. I never got to say thank you." She typed back, "You already did. Every day you're alive is thanks enough." That night, Ashley led her first training session in the hospital's largest conference room. 20 nurses. Some civilian, some veteran, all of them ready. She stood at the front, and she wasn't hiding anymore. Wasn't deferential. Wasn't small. She was teaching them how to perform emergency pericardiocentesis, how to recognize cardiac tamponade, how to save a life when the surgeon is 20 minutes away and time is measured in heartbeats. "The needle goes between ribs 3 and 4, she said, her hands demonstrating the angle, the depth, the precision that separates survival from death. Midclavicular line. You feel the resistance change when you breach the pericardium. That's your signal. Aspirate gently. You're buying time. That's all you're ever doing in the field. Buying time until the next unit arrives." One of the nurses raised her hand. "How did you learn this?" Ashley paused. Her eyes moved to the window where the city sprawled below them, where Sterling was probably sleeping on a futon in an apartment he couldn't afford, where Kandahar was 8,000 miles away and 8 years ago and somehow still breathing in the room with her. "Necessity," she said. "And then repetition. And then it becomes part of you." That was the truth. The erasure was gone. The invisibility was gone. The combat boots that had collected dust in a car trunk were now displayed in a place of honor, and every person in that training room would walk away understanding that the quietest person in the hospital might just be the one who'd already survived the worst. Subscribe for more stories about the heroes working in silence, the ones whose scars tell stories that change everything. And let us know in the comments, Have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know who you really were?